These could be heavy with some hail at times. The driest and brightest of the weather remains to be across the far north and northeast of Scotland. And temperatures will see a slight dip into tomorrow, particularly across Scotland, where highs will only reach around 6 to 7 Celsius, but still above average across parts of the south. Another chilly start on Thursday, likely seeing some patchy frost, but for many a much drier day, plenty of sunshine on offer, though we can't rule out a few showers around coastal areas, particularly once again across the far northwest of the country. And as high pressure begins to build, that means largely dry and bright on Friday and Saturday too, away from the northwest, will eventually turn wet and windy over the weekend. Bye-bye.
We'll see a cold snap, which will quickly develop into a warm front. Boxed Boiler Repairs, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Don't miss your chance to be one of 2 big winners in our latest Great British giveaway, as we have 2 prize bundles that have to be won. There's 2 lots of a totally tax-free £10,000 in cash. You'll also receive a brand new iPhone 16, along with £500 in shopping vouchers to spend at your favourite store. Hurry, lines close on the 7th of March. For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus 1 standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. Call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge, or post your name and number to GB11 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrants must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 7th of March. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more.
Whether it's breaking royal news,
Will, please bring us up to date.
or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons,
Very, very curious.
we bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christys tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christys tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. The Prime Minister has defied expectations and cut foreign aid to increase defence spending to 2.7% by 2027, a long overdue decision. Meanwhile, the Labour government's plan to reduce energy bills via net zero has failed as Ofgem hikes the energy price cap. The average household will now see an increase of more than £100 a year. Former Labour MP Mike Amesbury is set to receive his salary whilst he's in prison after assaulting a constituent. But should he be removed by a parliamentary vote? Plus, as the spiritual vacuum leads to Christianity waning in the UK, are we to expect a revival of the Catholic Church? That's what my final guest has argued. State of the Nation starts now. I'll also be joined by my most pugnacious panel, the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and the journalist and author, Michael Crigg. As ever, let me know your views. It's a crucial part of the programme. mailmog@gbnews.com. But now it's your favourite time of the day, the News Bulletin with Sophia Wensler.
Jacob, thank you. Good evening. It's just gone 8 o'clock. These are your headlines. Sir Keir Starmer has blamed a dangerous new era for his decision to increase defence spending and cut foreign aid. Earlier today, the Prime Minister announced a major plan to increase defence spending to 2.5% by 2027, calling it the biggest sustained increase since the Cold War. But to fund it, the aid budget will be slashed from 0.5% to 0.3% of national income, sparking backlash from charities who warn of devastating consequences. Addressing the nation from Downing Street, Sir Keir Starmer warned Putin's aggression does not stop in Ukraine and said the defence and national security of Britain must come first. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister went on to attack Nigel Farage for fawning over Putin as he faced questions from GB News' political editor Christopher Hope on whether he was Nigel Farage in disguise after his spending boost mirrored that promised in Reform UK's election manifesto.
Prime Minister Christopher Hope from GB News. In July, Reform UK fought the election on a policy to increase defence spending to 2.5% of GDP by 2027 and 3% of GDP after 2030, funded by a £6 billion saving in the aid budget. Are you Nigel Farage in disguise?
Nigel Farage didn't even turn up to the debate in Parliament today. Nigel Farage is fawning over Putin. That's not patriotism. That is not what working people need.
Now, energy bills are set to rise again, with Ofgem confirming a higher-than-expected increase of more than £100 a year from April. The 2.4% hike will push annual bills for a typical household to £1,849, affecting 22 million homes across England, Scotland and Wales. The regulator says rising wholesale costs are to blame and suggests customers consider fixing tariffs, but prices could fall again in July. Standing charges are also going up for gas, and consumer groups warn the increase will hit struggling families the hardest. Ukraine has agreed terms with the US on a minerals deal after Washington dropped its toughest demands. That's according to the Financial Times newspaper. Ukrainian officials hope it will improve relations with the Trump administration and pave the way for a long-term US security commitment. It's understood Kyiv is now ready to sign the agreement on jointly developing its mineral resources, including oil and gas, after the US dropped demands for a right to $500 billion in potential revenue from exploiting the resources. And the Vatican says the Pope is in a critical but stable condition for the fourth day running. The 88-year-old has been at Rome's Gemelli Hospital since the 14th of February and is being treated for double pneumonia and chronic bronchitis. The Pope's prognosis, it said, remains guarded. Those are the latest GB News headlines. More in an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome back to State of the Nation. Cicero told us that the sinews of war are unlimited money, nervus belli pecuniam infinitum. Last week on GB News, we suggested that overseas aid should be cut to fund a boost to defence spending. Today, Sir Keir Starmer has followed our advice. We're making policy on GB News. This is a remarkable step for a Labour Prime Minister who, for the first time, is moving against the internationalists in his party to put the domestic national interest first. Russia is a threat. Putin is dangerous. His invasion of Ukraine was fundamentally wrong, and the one unforgivable act if you believe in a world order legitimised by the nation-state. If sovereign borders are not sacrosanct, there is and can be no peace. We have been asleep. Under the coalition, it was assumed, as it was after the First World War, that there would be no war for 10 years. This left us unprepared, and support for Ukraine has left us understocked in terms of munitions. The defence budget has been consistently cut since the end of the Cold War, as we have grown fat on welfare. But even the money we've allocated to defence has been used wastefully on procurement schemes that never met budgets and produced unsatisfactory equipment. The reckoning, the great day of reckoning, is now upon us as Donald Trump looks to an aggressive America First policy, and we have to defend our own aisles. The shibboleth of comfort has to go. The wasteful expenditure on overseas aid will be cut down to half the legal target of 0.7%. Yet this is not enough. We are doing all by halves. We need a bigger economy and to get people back to work. The Prime Minister will need to cut the welfare budget, and the net zero nonsense needs to end too. We cannot make the argument we need if our energy cost is 4 times that of the United States and over 10 times that of Russia. We will simply find we can't afford to make munitions. The luxuries of idle prosperity will have to go because, as Vegetus told us 1,500 years ago, if you want peace, prepare for war. This is what we need to do now, and Sir Keir has made a modest start, an encouraging but modest start. There is much further to go. As ever, let me know your views via mailmog@gbnews.com. Well, I'm now joined by the Executive Director of the Henry Jackson Society, Alan Mendoza. Alan, thank you very much for joining us. This is a really important statement by Sir Keir Starmer, and I think a welcome one, even from his political opponents.
Yes, I mean, absolutely. I think he's done the right thing. We all knew defence spending would have to move. He's moved up the timelining for doing so, and it's important to recognise that. He's making the right choice here for Britain, and he's made the right choice for the budget cut as well. He's gone, the obvious place to take this from is another foreign, as it were, outward-facing budget. We're going to put it into defence and move forwards. The only thing I'd say, Jacob, is it enough? I'm struck by the fact that he said we've got to head for 3% in the next Parliament. But if you think you've got to head to 3% in the next Parliament when the threats are already here, why not move quicker towards it? I think that's the only bit I would quibble with and say we should be moving to 3% on an escalator right now as opposed to waiting to the next Parliament.
Isn't this, though, absolutely classic of the UK's defence policy, actually going back hundreds of years, that we always wait and wait and wait, and then we get to a point when we get really worried and we throw the kitchen sink at it? That's exactly what happened with the First and Second World War, but actually it happened in the Napoleonic Wars too.
Yes, you might well say that we have not learned from our own history when it comes to these matters. But, you know, as has been said on other occasions, the important thing is that you get there in the end before it is too late. And I think that the key to it is recognising we are now leading on this. We're leading within Europe, for example, where many other countries are still in the 1%, as it were. And we should be able to extend that beyond and show our American allies as well that we're serious about doing our bit for burden sharing.
And how should we behave towards our American allies? I was very struck that the motion at the UN Security Council that didn't apportion blame to Russia went through with us abstaining. But we've got a veto. Shouldn't we actually put forward our own views? And doesn't Trump respect strength rather than cravenness?
I think there's a certain degree, well, I'd agree with you there. And I think what President Macron has shown with his visit is that you can be quite bold and a bit cheeky and still get praised by President Trump, who I think enjoys a bit of sparring and a bit of repartee in that sort of way. Should we have used a veto on it? Look, we've not used the veto since 1989. And I think it's about time we did start, in Britain's interest, using the tools that are at our disposal. We're often told, aren't we, oh, we can't do this because of legal issues. This is something which is legally ours to use and do. I wouldn't have done it on that motion because fundamentally, we all believe that the war in Ukraine, everyone wants peace. That was a wrong motion to do it on, but there are things we could be using it on and should be using it on. For example, if the Chagos Islands issue ever hits the UN, I would expect Britain to use its veto and say, sorry, in our national defence interest, we're not going to be doing that. So I think, you know, there's definitely a case for being stronger, and I think President Trump would recognise that, but you've got to do it in the right spirit, which is in that sort of friendly way.
And you mentioned the Chagos Islands. That's quite important as a sort of an aside on this increase in defence spending, because it seems as if the great squid loads of money that are going to the Mauritian government will come out of the defence budget. So there may be an element of smoke and mirrors, which, if that's true, would be, I think, quite concerning.
If that's true, it would be more than concerning. It would be outrageous. It would be a total neglect of defence in exchange for a bad deal that we don't need to be doing and that nobody in the UK thinks we should be doing. So I hope that's not the case. I'd expect us to, again, I would hope the Americans will get us to change our minds on this, and that we can, look forward to a better relationship going forwards with them, as well as with the Chagos Islanders themselves.
Alan, thank you as always. Well, with me now is my panel, Kelvin McKenzie and Michael Crick. Kelvin, let me come to you first, because we can actually praise a socialist Prime Minister, can't we, and say he's doing the right thing. And isn't it wonderful he's cutting the ridiculous, wasteful, extravagant overseas aid budget?
Well, that's what I found most interesting. And what is most interesting about that is the Trump effect. Overseas aid is now an unwanted piece of meat lying in the corner. And actually, if we tried to do that under a Tory administration, even a year ago, the outcry would have been too enormous and would have drowned out the prospect of 2.53 or any number. Now it's, oh yeah, we needed 7 million quid or we needed £6 million, we're taking it from there. What an extraordinary change. And that is entirely down to Trump and his view of overseas aid, which of course is now leading to literally thousands of people being fired who are in the welfare, in the overseas welfare aid business.
But isn't the interesting thing about that if it had been done a year ago, the country at large would have been all in favour of it. The opinion polling's never been positive for overseas aid. It's only the blob that was against it. And then what Trump has done is empowered voters against the blob.
Yes, and there will be lots of other issues like that. So what Trump has proved is that we don't always have to go in that direction. We can go in this direction. And that has been an enormous change. Now, things will change again. 4 years' time, when Trump is gone, then you'll probably see a lot of people coming out of the rabbit holes and saying that we've got to start looking after people in Africa, India and beyond. But right now, at 2.5, it's neither here nor there, let's be honest. But what was great was the overseas aid being cut.
Michael.
It is utterly horrific to hear you three right-wingers and the glee you are...
But that's what you're here. That's what you're here for,
and the glee you are expressing at cuts which will lead to thousands, tens of thousands of people around the world who are dependent on British foreign aid and American foreign aid. People will die of starvation, they will die of lack of medicines, they will die from all the great programmes that both the American aid system and the British aid system carry out. Now, I've accepted on this programme before there is corruption in some of the aspects of it. There are inefficiencies. But overall, British foreign aid does an amazing job.
I'm not against emergency aid.
It was a despicable decision by Starmer on this. His decision on defence was a superb decision.
So how would
his defence of Ukraine was superb.
So how would you pay for it?
Well, I would put up taxes that are not covered. Sorry?
Even more?
Yes, I would.
Whereas more heavily taxed than we have been since the last war.
The council tax rates have not changed since the council tax was brought in 1991.
Tax has gone up and up and up.
There are properties that could easily bear a much higher tax. There are a whole range of extra taxes
I'm surprised that you can be in favour of this kind of idea, especially with having your daughter at Allain's, who must have been affected, your family must have been affected by the Labour increase on your taxes for the schooling, were you not?
We were, yeah.
Right. Well, I can't take any more of the cry poor for people who I don't know. I have enough problems in my own country. You may not have. You may not have them in Dulwich, Michael, but elsewhere in this country, there's a lot of poverty. Let's look after our own people first.
There is a lot of poverty,
but home. You know that.
That is just such a.
Is that not right? Is that not right?
This is such a selfish outlook.
Is it?
And if both of you and Mr. Mendoza go on about the national interest, it is actually in the national interest that we try and alleviate poverty throughout the globe.
No, it's not.
Week after week after week, you are complaining about migrants coming here illegally. Well, one of the reasons they come here illegally because they see a better life here compared with the poverty back home. If you are going to condemn them to poverty back home,
that's another reason why I don't.
If you're going to condemn them to greater poverty back home, expect more migrants on boats.
It's not greater poverty. Not greater poverty. There is poverty in our country. Once we've sorted that out, then let's worry about parts of Africa where there are constant warfare.
We'll never sort out poverty.
OK,
but the poverty in our country is nothing compared with the poverty in parts of Asia and parts of Africa.
I would like to think that once we've sorted ourselves out, then we can sort others out. Until that moment
that will never happen, and you
I
know
am
it.
not in favour either of paying 1 penny more in tax of any kind. We've got our energy going up, we've got our council tax going up.
If you were a proper humanitarian...
Which I'm not.
Right, OK.
I'm not.
And if you're a proper Christian, you should be concerned with these things. The last week we were discussing this. You said, oh, well, the way to deal with it is not foreign aid, it's to have proper free trade. You tell that to some poor starving child or some child dying of AIDS. Never mind, you'll be OK once free trade comes along.
This country is a great country.
Billions of people out of poverty. It's absolutely remarkable.
Trade is important, but foreign aid is an important way of getting from here to there.
Aid does not actually help with trade.
Sorry?
Aid does not help with trade. Aid for emergencies is one thing.
It may do, because it may give them a kick-start in terms of...
What you need for trade is to open up your market.
But if you are bringing, for instance, water schemes, if you're avoiding famine, you are avoiding disease,
we have
disease that may come here eventually.
To trade, which have stopped countries getting richer. The EU is classic at this, that it would allow the import of raw coffee, but not of processed coffee. Why? To protect Italian coffee processors. This is what we have done.
I'm not defending that. Of course I'm not, no.
But that's the point. It's those barriers that you need to get rid of, and then people become rich on their own basis.
We can do that too.
But with trade,
you can't expect...
your own community benefits too.
You are condemning tens of thousands.
Starmer, who does claim to be a socialist, he has actually kiboshed your argument.
He's sucked up to Trump.
Sucked up to anybody.
He doesn't believe in this policy.
He's made a sensible
he's done it just to please Trump. It's pathetic. The idea that Starmer has been influenced by Trump is absolute balderdash. He is doing it to suck up to Trump.
Right. Well, in fact, that's the only decent decision that he's made since July the 4th, so on that, I hope he sucks up some more.
Well, there we go. On the most extraordinary state of affairs, that Kelvin Mackenzie is now supporting Sir Keir Starmer for his best decision since July. Thank you to my panel. Shortly, we will be debating the energy price increases of more than £100 a year. Is net zero to blame?
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Well, you know I like an auction.
Yes.
And I've bought some strange things at auction before you have as well, haven't you, Eamon?
Yeah, well, Ellie would throw this in the bin that you're coming up with now.
How about this? Admiral Lord Nelson's hair.
No.
Cut. I mean, is this a bit spooky? Cut as he lay dying during the Battle of Trafalgar, so someone's gone, oh, we'll just have a little bit of that there. In 1805, is on sale in Jersey, and it's a little cup. How much would you pay for the hair?
No, nothing. It would go in the bin, straight in the bin.
What? Even what? Nelson? That's very disrespectful to the British culture and heritage.
I think it's disrespectful that he lay there dying and someone thought, we'll take a quick stick.
Well, maybe they just had. Maybe they thought, you know, because there's obviously the famous painting, isn't there, of the Battle of Trafalgar? Maybe they thought we'll give him a quick haircut, and then they kept their £15,000, 15 grand.
Where's the hair come from? What part of the body?
His head, Eamon.
Well, it could be his underarm. I don't know. You know, it depends.
Hold on, let me have a little look.
You would bid
very curly. I think it's his. I think it's his head. It's his head. What?
You would bid more for his head than, say, his underarm.
Well, I think so. Yeah, I would hope so. Yeah.
Or anywhere else.
I would hope so. A little less whiffy there, the head hair. And there it is. And it's in a little pot.
No.
And the only way you can probably find out is if you DNA test it, I guess. It's definitely his.
Whoever pays for that is bonkers.
Well,
that's creepy.
I was seriously tempted to make a bid for a toupee, not for me, but as worn by John Wayne.
John Wayne's wig.
Yeah.
Why?
Wow.
Why?
Well, why I didn't get it was my wife said to me, that is not coming into the...
Well, she's right. She's right.
GB News, the People's Channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, though.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and we were discussing the defence budget, and the Mail Mogs have come zooming in. Carter says 0.2% is nowhere near enough. Scrap the foreign aid budget entirely and put it all into the defence budget. Surely the first priority of government is the defence of the realm. And Will says, if we need more money for defence, shouldn't we start by emptying our jails of foreign criminals? Well, we could sign them up to the army. That's what we always used to do with people in jails, but that's perhaps a bit 18th century. In spite of Labour's promise to reduce energy bills through its massively expensive grid decarbonisation plans, today Ofgem has announced its price cap hike, which means the average household energy bill will increase by more than £100 a year. The government has insisted this is because of a spike in wholesale gas prices, but an exclusive analysis for GB News by Professor Gordon Hughes has claimed it's green subsidies that have made the biggest contribution to increased energy bills. Well, joining me now for the debate is Bob Ward, the Policy and Communications Director at the Grantham Research Institute, LSE, and David Turver, energy policy expert and author of Eigenvalues Substack. Well, thank you both very much for coming in. Bob, let me come to you first, because I think this is really important analysis, because we've constantly been told that renewables are cheaper. But this research shows that even with the price spike in 22-23, since 1997, if we just stuck to gas, people would have lower bills.
Well, I can't comment on a secret analysis which nobody has seen, but here are the facts.
No, this is public.
Here are the facts. No, it isn't public. I've asked him for the details and he hasn't published them. But here are the facts. The bill is going up £111 a year. £86 of that rise is due to the increase in the price of natural gas. It is natural gas that is driving up our bills, and that's because the way in which we set electricity, marginal pricing, means the most expensive source of electricity sets the price. 98% of the time, that is natural gas. So it's not net zero, it's not renewables, it's natural gas that is putting up our...
because we're spending £10 billion a year on renewables that are only available a third of the time.
Jacob, the majority of the price of energy is the wholesale price of electricity, and it's being driven by the price of natural gas.
The prices that have been set for wind and for nuclear are contracts for difference that maintain minimum prices for them. We pay the wind companies for wind that we don't use when the wind blows, when we don't need it. We subsidise them for the wind that they do produce.
Look, all you have to do is Ofgem were very clear. Ofgem were very clear. The Bank of England were very clear in their monetary policy report earlier this month. It is the price of natural gas that's going up. It's still much higher than it was before Ukraine's invasion of Russia. So no matter how much you try and protest it's net zero and renewables, the fact is it's gas that's setting the price, and that's the reason it's expensive.
The wholesale price accounts for 39% of the final bill before the crisis. It's now 43%. That is a marginal increase. But David, let me bring you in.
I think we need to look at this over different timescales. So Bob is right that the increase that was announced today, most of that is down to an increase in natural gas prices. But he's only partly right when he says that gas sets the wholesale price. So it's true that it does, but that doesn't reflect the whole cost of renewables. So as I think you were about to say, if we take, for instance, contracts for difference subsidies, the average for offshore wind contract for which different subsidies or strike price is about £150 per megawatt hour. For onshore, it's about 113. For solar, it's about 110 presently. Those are index linked and go up every year. And those are a substantial driver of what's on our energy bills. In total, it's about, my calculation is about 11 billion a year in subsidies. We pay another £2.5 billion a year in grid balancing costs and another billion in backup costs. And then the other big components that have gone up a lot is what's called network costs. So because all these wind farms are dispersed and distributed and miles away from the source of demand, we have to install new cables to connect them to the source of demand, and that's pushing up bills too. And that's going to get even worse.
They aren't.
Excuse me, Bob. Excuse me, Bob.
But this is not your monologue. No. It is meant to be a debate.
No,
and let's be clear about the facts.
But I let you finish, so please let me finish.
Let them finish.
As long as I get a chance to come back and say why he's wrong.
You will.
National Grid has announced that they want to spend 112 billion between, I think it was 2023 and 2035, extra on those extra transmission and distribution lines. And if we look at Ed Miliband's plan, he wants to spend between 260 and 290 billion on his clean power plan, according to NESO's figures, to get us almost to a net zero grid by 2030. But all we'll save is £7 billion a year in gas. So presently we spend just over £8 billion on gas using 2023 volumes and today's prices. And he'll save about £7 billion of that because we'll still have some gas on the grid. So if you just think about the cost of capital for that 280 billion and the operation and maintenance costs, it's going to be like 4 times more than the gas that we're saving. And of course we pay carbon tax on the gas-fired generation too.
Yeah, so these are all very interesting figures he's invented. We'll see if any of them
on what
match.
basis has he invented them?
Because
these are Ed Miliband's plans. Do you dispute the 200 billion that he's
his
proposing?
argument is based on the assumption that gas stays at the same price. Right? And you know firsthand, Jacob, because you were Energy Secretary during part of the energy crisis, you spent £58 billion of taxpayers' money protecting consumers because the price of gas went up. So the assumption of stable, low gas prices is simply based on an assumption. You need to make investments in your electricity system no matter what it is.
Not on the same level.
You can't, for instance, have a nuclear power stations that last forever without any investment. So an argument that we shouldn't be spending any money on the electricity system
that's not
seems
the
a bit
argument.
dumb. Well,
he's making straightforwardly what David was not saying.
He is making an argument that the costs of investment in renewables are not
disproportionate.
It's not disproportionate because he hasn't cited what the counterfactual is,
suggesting the return on capital is insufficient, that the cost that you save is low compared to the hundreds of billions that you would be spending.
The savings were based on an assumption of low gas prices.
On gas, the gas price spiked
which is not a reasonable assumption,
an extraordinary international event. Actually, we have now discovered there's a lot of gas in Lincolnshire which we could extract. There's the opportunity to frack, to have a domestic, secure supply. And if there's peace in Ukraine, then we have plentiful supplies from Russia coming through again.
Until we have another crisis, which happens all the time.
Which means that actually the gas price is likely to fall as rise. But let David have the final word, because you've had plenty of...
No, the numbers I gave were not based on low, stable gas prices. They were based on today's price, which you already said was high.
Higher than before.
And in order for Ed Miliband's sums to work, the gas price would have to rise 5-fold from here and stay there for the next 25 years in order to be cheaper than what he's...
It's a fantasy to think that fracking would reduce our bills. It's pure fantasy.
But
it's reduced the bills in America enormously.
Yeah, but we don't have... We're not America. We don't have America's supplies of natural gas.
We have enormous supplies of natural gas.
The stories of treasure under our feet from fracking is like the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow.
Well, they seem to have found it in Lincolnshire. But anyway, thank you very much to Bob and David. In a moment, as the former Labour MP Mike Amesbury is set to receive his salary in prison, I'll be asking why Parliament doesn't just expel him.
Dinner under the stars tonight?
That reminds me of our travel insurance.
You mean All Clear Skies?
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News travel destinations forecast. If you're heading away for some winter sun through this week, there will be some fine weather around across parts of the Mediterranean, but currently around the eastern Med it's still fairly unsettled. Some heavy rain, some strong winds and temperatures well below average for the time of year, but these are gradually going to be lifting. Further west, a drier story across many parts of, well, France and Spain, but there is some wet weather starting to push its way in as we go later on this week. Otherwise, some decent sunshine on offer. See you later.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date. Or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK.
We're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date. Or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Headliners on GB News 11 p.m. every night. It's got 3 top comedians going through the next day's newspapers so you don't have to read them, which is great.
That's a good point.
He's lying. Maybe he's not lying. That's Headliners every night from 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. as well on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation, isn't it?
Because
the failure is...
You're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff. Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood. So join me on Jubes and Co. weeknights at 6 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Former Labour MP Mike Amesbury has been sentenced 10 weeks in prison after pleading guilty to assault after he repeatedly punched a constituent in the street in October. But Mr Amesbury will continue receiving his £91,000 a year salary from prison, prompting questions about whether Parliament ought to expel him, as it removed Peter Baker in 1954 and Horatio Bottomley in 1922. When they were sent to prison. Well, my most pugnacious panel is back with me, Kelvin Mackenzie and Michael Crick. Michael, you're a great expert on parliamentary procedure. Parliament has the right to expel members. I don't understand why a government with a majority of 173 doesn't follow the traditional process where the Leader of the House puts down a motion to expel somebody who's gone to prison.
And there'd be hardly anybody who would vote against that. I mean, whether the government's got a majority or not. No, and this whole thing of the recall petition, which is a unsatisfactory system, in my view. It's got all sorts of flaws. And in terms of the ones they've had so far, there's been about 10 so far, I think. And all the ones in Britain have gone against the MP. They've either resigned with the prospect of it, or they've been defeated. And the only one that succeeded was Ian Paisley Jr. in Northern Ireland. And it only takes 10% of the electorate to vote against the MP for had to be a by-election. Well, in most constituencies, there's going to be 10% of the electorate against the MP, whether he's a wonderful MP or not.
And it seems to me that it really offends the electorate that somebody who has been found guilty and going to prison is going to be paid for that 10 weeks. I heard Yvette Cooper on the radio this morning saying, oh, it's a matter of Parliament, not for the government. This is such nonsense. The government has a majority. It can just do it if it wants to.
Yes. And, of course, they don't want to do it, and they want to keep it as long as possible because with council tax going up in April and with energy prices going up in April and with food prices being 5%, this will be a disastrous year for any government, and they want to keep a by-election on the long finger for as long as possible. In fact, your intro is wrong here because you described him as a former.
Well, he's a former Labour MP. Yeah. He's not a former MP.
Yeah, that is true, actually. That's very clever, that. Right, give this man a banana, honestly.
But I'm very glad you've clarified it.
Well, of course, the other people who don't actually want this by-election to happen, or would rather delay it, are the Conservative Party.
No, it's going to be slaughtered.
Both major parties will be slaughtered by reform.
Yeah.
I mean, if I was an ambitious politician, I would not want to be the Conservative or Labour candidate in Runcorn and Helsby.
But isn't that an amazing moment in our politics? Here we are, 8 months after a terrible beating for the Tories. They've got a new leader. They're fighting on all fronts, and they're going to go into an election where actually the voters will be doing the one thing that Kemi and Nigel won't do. The voters will be merging their votes, but with reform this time. And so you're going to see what happened in the general election, actually in various areas, especially with the Lib Dems and Labour against the Tories. You're going to see that happen there. And you're going to see, regardless of whether people actually believe that the Conservatives and Reform are going to merge, the voters will decide.
That's a very interesting point, isn't it? That voters will very likely in a by-election of this kind say our main aim is to defeat the government, hasn't done very well in its first 7-8 months. We will vote for the party most likely to do it, and Conservative voters won't be rallying to the flag.
No, and that generally happens in by-elections, that voters work out early on who is the challenger. And frequently, of course, it's the Lib Dems. But there were by-elections, remember, from 10 years ago, where it was UKIP.
This vote here, by the way, it's the 16th safest, I think the 16th Labour seat.
Let's just throw a name into the pond.
Yeah.
And what if Boris Johnson stood in this seat?
Oh, he'd win by a mile. He'd win by a mile.
Who for?
Well, for the same party he always fights for, the Boris Johnson party.
If Calvin's right and there'd be an alliance to defeat Labour, Boris could easily be the beneficiary of that if he threw his hat into
Well, if there was an alliance with Boris Johnson, it might work. You've got to remember, though, this seat is also, it's Scouse. It's Merseyside. It's more Merseyside than it is Cheshire. And Boris Johnson, like Mr Mackenzie, is not very popular on Merseyside.
Do you know what? I think that's outrageous. An outrageous slur on a great journalist.
So it might not work.
It might not work because of that interesting detail. Anyway, in other news, it's been revealed that portraits of Winston Churchill, Lord Nelson and the Duke of Wellington in Parliament have been removed following Labour's landslide election in July. While a spokesman said this was merely part of regular movements in Parliamentary artwork collection, there was a BLM-linked audit of the collection a few years ago, and I wonder if that was part of the reason for moving them. Well, back to my panel. This is so boring, isn't it? You move the great heroes of the nation and you put up heaven knows who. They put one up of current politicians, which I don't think they should do anyway.
No, I mean, that is a laugh, isn't it? Yvette Cooper, Lord Nelson, hold on a second, who has made a good
That is so boring as a story. I mean, people keep going on about, Winston Churchill in the Oval Office and Winston Churchill...
I don't care about...
Inevitably... I mean, I don't know how it is in your house, but you move the pictures around, you put new ones up, and there comes a point when nobody knows who the people are. I think it's good to have Winston Churchill there.
You need to get my wife on about moving, because I wouldn't dare move a picture without her permission.
I have a confession to make. One of the pictures in our house is of you. It's a cartoon of you. But no, I mean... inevitably over time, new people emerge. You can't keep Lord Salisbury and
Why not?
No, but you can keep Drake and you can keep Nelson. And the reason that we don't have either of them now is, of course, BLM linked, because both of them, I think Drake was actually, when a youth, was actually part of the slave trade, and I think that Nelson actually kind of approved of it.
He spoke in the Lords in favour of it.
So
very marginally.
So you know, the truth about the matter is that these are being done for political reasons, and if we were replacing them with some great grandees of our modern... For instance, there was a picture of Jacob. Now, that's one thing. No, but seriously, I object to having Cooper going up on the thing when she's achieved nothing, whereas Nelson, whether you liked him or didn't like him, he did achieve something.
It may well be that some of the replacement pictures are not portraits. They may be landscapes. So there's all sorts of other art that you can have on the walls of the Commons. Why not, vary it a bit from time to time?
I'm not against that. I'm against losing Nelson, and I'm against losing Drake.
Nelson does have his own column.
They do have some artwork.
Churchill, there are endless statues and pictures of Churchill.
There's some artwork by Churchill in the House of Commons, which obviously are not portraits. But the old principle that you don't put the pictures up and the statues up until people have died seems to me to be a good one, because you don't want to be having portraits of people who are currently involved in political controversy.
David Cameron, for instance.
But on the other hand, there are a lot of parties of visitors, particularly school children, go around the Palace of Westminster, and probably more than ever. And when they're going around, they like to see people on the wall. If they don't bump into them, they like to see them on the wall.
Bump into them and then on the wall see your history. And the pictures in Parliament paint a wonderful story of our history. In St Stephen's entrance and between the Lords and the Commons, this idea of how our democracy built up, the pictures of Magna Carta, the pictures around the Civil War. It's such pride in our democracy and in our constitution that our Victorian forebears had, and it's all got a purpose to it. And it seems to be just randomly removing people because they're a bit out of fashion.
But, if you go around,
that sense of purpose.
If you go around Portcullis House and you see, for instance, there's a picture of Betty Boothroyd there when she was by then in the Lords, the first woman speaker. I think there's a picture
not dead, but in the Elysian Fields,
that's right.
Disraeli said.
David Blunkett there and Diane Abbott, people like that. Well, they may be, Blunkett and Abbott are very much still alive, but it's well worth having their portraits there because they did achieve something in their different ways, and that will chime with many of the visitors who go to the Commons.
A little bit patient, because then you have an idea of whether people's careers were that interesting or not.
Don't try and compare either an old speaker or the current Home Secretary with somebody who went to war and actually was uniquely in our military history successful. I want to see him stay up there, and I'd like to see Yvette Cooper. Actually, if she became a military victor in some way, then obviously she can sit alongside Nelson. Otherwise, I'd be grateful if she get out.
Well, thank you to my most pugnacious panel. And for this evening's denouement, I will be speaking to one man who thinks there's a good reason to believe a Catholic revival is on the horizon.
Hello there, good evening. Welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. A brighter start across eastern areas tomorrow, but feeling chilly with some patchy frost. A different story in the west, turning wet and windy here with some heavy showers following on behind. This is where we see this frontal system slowly moving its way eastwards across the country, but a slight ridge of high pressure before this, which means most showers across England and Wales will ease away overnight. That's away from the far north of Scotland. But plenty of clear skies means temperatures are soon going to dip away, and that leads us to a frosty start tomorrow. But different in the west, clouds spilling in here with some outbreaks of rain, particularly for Northern Ireland, Wales and parts of southwest England. We could actually see some quite heavy downpours by the morning, and turning rather blustery around western coasts too. Temperatures largely remaining just above freezing, particularly in the west where we see these cloudier skies, but quite a wet start across parts of Devon and Cornwall, Wales, eventually moving into central parts of England too. Northern Ireland could see some quite heavy showers, and as we see this heavy rain move across northern parts parts of England. We may even see some snow across high ground in the Pennines, but largely dry and bright across the far north and northeast of Scotland, though we can't rule out a few showers moving into coastal areas. Outbreaks of rain will move their way eastwards erratically through the course of the day, and it turns a little bit brighter behind this, but still plenty of showers. These could be heavy with some hail at times. The driest and brightest of the weather remains to be across the far north and northeast of Scotland. And temperatures will see a slight dip into tomorrow, particularly across Scotland, where highs will only reach around 6 to 7 Celsius, but still above average across parts of the south. Another chilly start on Thursday, likely seeing some patchy frost, but for many a much drier day, plenty of sunshine on offer, though we can't rule out a few showers around coastal areas, particularly once again across the far northwest of the country. And as high pressure begins to build, that means largely dry and bright on Friday and Saturday too. Away from the northwest will eventually turn wet and windy over the weekend. Bye-bye.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, though.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Very often in current times, we see reports indicating a societal shift towards an increasingly secular and godless society. Indeed, the percentage of people in England and Wales claiming to be Christian has fallen from 72% in 2001 to 46.2% in 2021. However, is Britain's decline tied to its rejection of Catholicism? Once known as Our Lady's Dowry, the nation has drifted from its religious roots, but could a return to the faith be the answer? Scholars argue that England's moral and cultural unravelling began with the Reformation, leading to secularism, authoritarianism and a loss of objective truth. As the nation faces social and political upheaval, a revival could be on the horizon. As we hear of the Holy Father, Pope Francis, who is very unwell at the moment, and a new chapter of our church's story is on the horizon, could reclaiming the supernatural core of Christianity be the key to Britain's renewal? Well, I'm joined now by Edward Pentin, an expert on the papacy and the Holy See. Edward, before we get on to England being Our Lady's Dowry, a title of great antiquity, we were quibbling about whether it started with Richard II or earlier, just before we started broadcasting. What is the latest information about the Holy Father?
Well, he seems to be improving it slightly. He's stable. It's still a critical condition, but there is obviously concern that maybe his organs are starting to fail. And so there's a lot of concern in Rome. There's praying the rosary every night. The cardinals are praying in St. Peter's Square. So there's a lot of concern, but I think he seems to be coping all right for the moment. Yeah.
Which is very good news. He is nonetheless 88, and even popes don't live forever. Yeah. Is there a plan? Who are the runners and riders at the moment? I see Cardinal Burke has just gone to Rome to help pray for the Holy Father, very much supported by traditional Catholics. Is he papabile?
Yes, Cardinal Burke is, I think, although many people think being an American, it makes it difficult with the American superpower. It's traditionally not been the case that a superpower cardinal from a superpower can become Pope. But yes, and there's lots of talk about, obviously, the next conclave. We produced a website called the collegeofcardinalsreport.com, where you can see all of the different candidates. And it's really to be a service to the cardinals so that they can know each other before they vote for each other.
Oh, right, so they have a sort of introduction. But a lot of manoeuvrings go on, don't they? Because the Curia is a very political outfit.
It is, yes. I think it's overdone a little bit. I think what's lost in that is that it's not like any other institution. There is a divine element to it. So, and it's all about, of course, the salvation of souls. So that's the primary interest, I think, of most of the cardinals. Of course, there are some that are very political and want the power, But I think the majority want the good of the church and the good of souls. And I think that's the key element in a conclave, and that's the key priorities for the cardinals.
And talking of England, that religious faith has declined dramatically in the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years, that this was a routinely Christian country when I was born. It's now a routinely agnostic country, I think. Where do you see a Christian and a Catholic revival coming from?
Well, it's interesting. You're seeing a lot of young people showing an interest in the spiritual. There was a big conference last week. It was the ARC conference, and it was very interesting to hear from the speakers how much the young people are getting interested in the spiritual. And I think as things become darker, the society becomes sort of more lost, then I think there tends to be a thirst and a realization that there has to be a light, there has to be a meaning. And of course, we believe that the Catholic faith has that meaning, has that light. And so there does seem to be, as somebody said, a bubbling under the surface of a revival. Yeah.
And the institutions that are doing well within the church seem to be the ones that are very traditional in their teaching. The Brompton Oratory is always packed. I notice if I ever go to the Old Rite Mass there, it's not only well attended, but it's well attended by lots and lots of young people, even quite early in the morning. The Institute of Christ the King, where actually I'm very proud of my nephew, who's a seminarian with them. Their seminary is full to overflowing. They can't take all the people who are going. And that this seems to be where the church is at its strongest. People want real faith, not the sort of 1960s liberal pap.
Exactly, and they want the clarity of the teaching of the church, the clarity of morals that the church gives. But not only that, it's sort of the supernatural too, the element of as Rod Dreher says in his new book, of enchantment, of the sense of transcendent. I think a lot of young people especially are looking for that, because of course there is a great absence of it in the world today, especially in the West. And so yes, they're looking for that authenticity, which you get from the traditional Catholic faith particularly.
And as you say, a gap in people's lives, that a secular world doesn't have that end point. It doesn't give people that fulfillment that they need, and leaves a space for all sorts of other things, whether it's drug addiction or addiction to iPhones.
Yes, it doesn't have the infinite, the sense of the infinite, of course, which the Church through the sacraments gives us. And so, yes, without that, people look to other sources of pleasure and so forth, instead of looking to the end goal, which, of course, we're all going to at our death, and hopefully
one way or the other.
One way or the other.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what about the Church itself? How good do you think the hierarchy is at getting its message across and actually proselytizing? Or is this a sort of decolonise the church bit and they're a bit nervous about it?
Yes, it's a good question. I think in recent years, perhaps in the last 40, 50, 60 years, the hierarchy, I think, because there's been more emphasis on the laity, they've taken slightly more of a back seat. And so they've been rather quiet about these issues. And I think perhaps a little bit fearful, because there are lots of issues which the church should be speaking up against or for. But of course, if they do, there'll be repercussions.
There'll be repercussions. I did hear Cardinal Vincent Nichol give one of the best sermons I've ever listened to the assembled judges for the Red Mass, when he told them they might be very important judges nowadays, but they had a hired judge they'd have to wait to come before in due course. I think they slightly quailed in front of that. Anyway, thank you very much, Edward. Edward mentioned the ARC conference. Members of the ARC Advisory Board include investors in GBNews, as I'm sure you know. He wasn't talking about Noah's Ark, it's spelt differently. Next, it's the one and only Patrick Christys. Patrick, what's on your programme this evening?
Well, loads now, Jacob. Obviously, I'm going to be talking about that cut in foreign aid and that hike in defence spending. I personally think that's all down to Trump. Energy bills, they're going up again. I mean, Ed Miliband, has he no shame? In some other news, though, trans police officers will now be able to strip search women. Surely that should be illegal. And believe it or not, in modern Britain, Jacob, witchcraft amongst children is going up, or at least their parents certainly think it is. We'll add that to the list of FGM, female genital mutilation, and, of course, honour killings as well. I'll be posing the question, are we really going backwards, and is this what is meant by multiculturalism?
Double, toil and trouble, fire burn and cauldron bubble. When shall we three meet again? Oft in thunder. Anyway, etc., etc. That'll all be very exciting, talking about witchcraft and electricity prices. It's After the Weather. I'm back next week. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. In case you'd forgotten, this has been State of the Nation and the weather in Somerset. It's going to be absolutely glorious for a whole week, a week of sunshine.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, good evening. Welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. A brighter start across eastern areas tomorrow, but feeling chilly with some patchy frost. A different story in the west, turning wet and windy here with some heavy showers following on behind. This is where we see this frontal system slowly moving its way eastwards across the country, but a slight ridge of high pressure before this, which means most showers across England and Wales will ease away overnight. That's away from the far north of Scotland, but plenty of clear skies means temperatures are soon going to dip away, and that leads us to a frosty start tomorrow. But different in the west, clouds spilling in here with some outbreaks of rain, particularly for Northern Ireland, Wales and parts of southwest England. We could actually see some quite heavy downpours by the morning and turning rather blustery around western coasts too. Temperatures largely remaining just above freezing, particularly in the west where we see these cloudier skies, but quite a wet start across parts of Devon and Cornwall, Wales, eventually moving into central parts of England too. Northern Ireland could see some quite heavy showers, and as we see this heavy rain move across northern parts of England, we may even see some snow across high ground in the Pennines, but largely dry and bright across the far north and northeast of Scotland, though we can't rule out a few showers moving into coastal areas. Outbreaks of rain will move their way eastwards erratically through the course of the day, and it turns a little bit brighter behind this, but still plenty of showers. These could be